No one at the Fremont factory expected the day to begin with silence. Usually, the buzz of electric forklifts, the rhythmic click of assembly tools, and the murmur of engineers running diagnostics painted the soundscape of the morning. But on this particular Tuesday, it was as if the entire building was holding its breath. Something had happened, something small, almost laughable if you looked at it plainly. But everyone felt the weight of it. The kind of weight that doesn't come from the act itself, but from who witnessed it. That morning, Elon Musk had walked in earlier than usual. Not for a high-profile investor meeting or a surprise product inspection, but because according to him, he couldn't sleep. He wore a worn black hoodie, slightly scuffed sneakers, and the kind of look in his eyes that said he was hunting for something, but even he didn't know what. Some called these his wandering mornings, when he'd walk the production floor, like a ghost chasing a scent. At 5:47 a.m., Elon stopped in his tracks near line D4. Amid the organized chaos of Tesla's production hive, there was one form slouched awkwardly across a bench, jacket bunched under his head, hands tucked under his chest, and the faint rise and fall of his chest giving away the fact that he wasn't injured, just asleep. The man's name was Mateo Reyes, a 29-year-old technician who'd been with the company just over 6 months. He was quiet, punctual, the kind who never caused trouble and rarely said more than necessary. Most barely noticed him, but those who did liked him. He had a softness in his voice, a gentleness to his eyes, and a strange habit of offering help without ever being asked. In any other company, this would have been a textbook HR issue. Document the incident, reprimand the employee, maybe issue a warning, maybe even let him go. But Tesla wasn't just any company, and Elon Musk wasn't just any CEO. The room held still. People watched through half glances from across the floor, waiting to see if this was going to be the beginning of a quiet firing or something else entirely. Elon stood there, looking at Mateo for a long, uncomfortable minute. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just watched the sleeping figure like he was staring at a puzzle that didn't quite make sense. A low beep from one of the automated carts broke the tension. Elon blinked, then slowly approached Mateo, kneeling next to him. And instead of nudging him awake, he did something no one expected. He sat down on the floor next to the bench. Just sat there. People whispered from behind nearby machinery. One guy from quality control swore he saw Elon pull out his phone, not to take a picture, but to type something into his notes. 10 minutes passed. Then, with a quiet voice that barely reached those nearby, Elon finally spoke. "Hey." Mateo stirred, eyes groggy, breath catching in his throat when he realized who was sitting next to him. Panic flashed through his face. He stood up quickly, almost knocking over his water bottle, muttering apologies, straightening his badge like it would somehow undo what had just happened. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Musk. I didn't mean to. I was just going to rest my eyes for a second. I've been pulling double shifts and my kid's been sick and..." Elon raised a hand gently, signaling him to stop. "It's okay," he said, "but let's talk." The two of them walked toward one of the private meeting rooms near the edge of the production floor. No one knew what was said behind that glass wall, but everyone knew something important was unfolding. Whispers spread. Rumors bloomed. People speculated. And most were wrong. Because what happened next didn't just shake the factory floor. It changed it. The glass-walled meeting room was uncomfortably silent at first. Elon didn't rush to speak, and Mateo was clearly struggling to keep his breathing steady. The door clicked shut behind them, muting the factory noise outside. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed to a crawl. Mateo stood, arms crossed tightly in front of him, as if preparing for impact. Elon sat on the edge of the table, his fingers loosely interlaced, looking not like a CEO, but more like someone who had come across a mystery he genuinely wanted to understand. "You've been sleeping here often?" Elon asked, his voice calm, almost curious. Mateo looked down at his shoes. "No, sir. I mean, not like that. Just today. I was up all night with my son. He has asthma, and we couldn't get his prescription filled until this morning. I barely made it in on time for the shift. I thought maybe a minute or two resting wouldn't hurt." Elon nodded slowly. "So you're a father?" "Yeah, Matteo replied quietly. Single dad. Elon shifted in his seat. What's his name? Santi, short for Santiago. He's 5. A small smile tugged at the corner of Elon's mouth. That's a strong name. Matteo still hadn't met his eyes. He was embarrassed, that much was obvious. But there was also something deeper, a weight that people like him often carried, without complaint. The kind of fatigue that goes beyond physical exhaustion. The kind that settles in your bones and in the quiet corners of your mind. It was the fatigue of responsibility, of doing everything you could and still falling short. Elon recognized it, not because he had lived the same life, but because he'd seen it in people before. People who pushed through, regardless of what they carried. I don't want to lose my job, Matteo said suddenly, his voice cracking a little. I know this isn't a good look, but I've worked hard and I just can't afford to mess this up. There was a long pause. I'm not here to fire you, Elon said at last. I'm here to understand you. That caught Matteo off guard. He blinked, finally looking up. Most companies would write this off as a violation, Elon continued. But that's not how I want Tesla to operate. At least not when there's more to the story. People aren't machines. And even if we're building the future with machines, it's people like you who are actually making it happen. He stood up and walked to the large whiteboard on the far wall. Grabbing a marker, he wrote one word in the center: balance. We talk a lot about speed, efficiency, optimization. But if the people behind those systems are burning out, then what exactly are we optimizing for? He looked at Matteo. You're not a flaw in the system. You're a signal. Something's off. And instead of punishing that signal, maybe we should be listening to it. Matteo sat down slowly. His breathing was calmer now, but his eyes were still wide with disbelief. So he started hesitant. What happens now? Elon turned around, leaned on the table, and smiled. Not the kind of smile you give in a press release, but one that seemed born from genuine inspiration. I want to try something, he said. An experiment, if you're open to it. Matteo nodded cautiously. You'll take the rest of the day off. Paid. No questions. But next week, you and I are going to start a new project. Internal. Small scale at first. I want you to help me design a system that actually tracks team fatigue. I'm not talking about biometrics or sleep trackers. I'm talking human signals. Conversations. Anonymous feedback loops. A way for leadership to actually feel the pulse of the people they depend on. Matteo blinked. You want me to work on that? With you? I do. Because you're the one who got me thinking about it in the first place. A knock on the glass interrupted the moment. One of the senior engineers, Karen Lee, stood outside holding a tablet and looking slightly puzzled. Elon waved her off gently and turned back to Matteo. Let's not make a spectacle of this, he added. Word's probably already spreading, and I can't control the rumors. But I can control how we move forward. Matteo swallowed hard. There was a shift in his posture, something lighter, though he still looked like he wasn't quite sure what planet he'd landed on. Outside, the production floor was still buzzing with quiet speculation. People glanced at the meeting room every so often, trying to read lips through the glass, wondering if they'd just witnessed the beginning of a firing or the start of something entirely different. And as Elon and Matteo stepped back onto the floor, side by side, no one could quite believe what they were seeing. Elon placed a hand on Matteo's shoulder, not for show, but as a gesture of genuine respect. Later that afternoon, word traveled like wildfire. Not about a termination, not about HR stepping in, but about something else, something far more rare in places ruled by metrics and output. Grace. And that's when people really started paying attention. Before we jump into the next part of the story, a quick moment just between us. If you're still here, that probably means you're feeling something too. Maybe you've worked somewhere that forgot the humans behind the workflow. Or maybe you just like seeing the unexpected unfold in a place known for innovation. Either way, if you haven't subscribed yet, maybe now's a good time. Not because you should, but because it'd be cool to keep sharing moments like this together. All right, back to the story. It didn't take long for whispers to spread beyond the production floor. Tesla's internal messaging channels lit up with coded questions and cautious speculations. What happened with the guy who fell asleep? Did Musk actually sit with him? I heard they're working on something together now. No one had the full story, but the ambiguity only made it grow. In a company obsessed with precision, the one thing nobody could quantify was the ripple of human emotion, and this ripple was turning into a wave. Karen Lee, the senior engineer who had knocked on the glass, was the first to voice the thoughts others were holding back. She cornered Elon later that day in the executive wing, away from a factory noise, holding a tablet that displayed performance metrics and predictive models for Q3 output. "You're making waves again," she said without looking up from the screen. Her voice was calm but firm, the voice of someone who admired Elon but wasn't afraid to challenge him. "I prefer to think of it as tuning the water," he replied dryly, sipping on a lukewarm coffee. She finally looked up. People are confused. Some are inspired. Others are anxious. They don't know what to make of it. The whole sleeping tech becomes the new empathy lead narrative? It's catching fire. Fast. Elon shrugged. "Good. Let it." Karen tilted her head. "You're not worried about the message it sends." Elon leaned forward, setting his cup on the counter. "That we notice people. That we treat exhaustion as data instead of disobedience. That leadership is more than optimizing KPIs." "You know that's not how everyone will see it," she said. "Some will think it's favoritism. Others might start pushing boundaries, testing how far compassion goes before the system snaps." "And maybe they should," he said, "because if the system can't hold a little compassion, then maybe it deserves to snap." Karen paused, unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. She tapped a few things on her tablet, then softened her voice. "I just hope you know what you're doing, Elon. Culture moves fast, but trust can evaporate in a heartbeat." That conversation stuck with Elon longer than he expected. It echoed in his mind as he stood alone on the factory balcony later that night, watching the automated arms move in hypnotic rhythm below. Somewhere amid the hum of machines and faint bass of work music, he thought about the faces behind the flow. Matteo's face among them now. Across town, Matteo was sitting on the couch in his modest apartment, still wearing his uniform. The apartment was small, barely 2 bedrooms, a cramped kitchen with peeling linoleum, and toys scattered around like confetti from a storm. His son, Santiago, was fast asleep in the adjacent room, a nebulizer machine humming softly beside his bed. Matteo held his phone in one hand, staring at it, not texting, not scrolling, just holding it like it contained some gravity he couldn't explain. In his other hand, a cooling cup of instant coffee trembled slightly. He had replayed the conversation with Elon a dozen times in his head. Was this real? Was it a test? Was he going to be asked to train someone only to be replaced? Or was this genuinely what it looked like? His sister Anna called just after 10 p.m. "Tell me again," she said, barely waiting for him to say hello. "You were sleeping, and the CEO of Tesla decided to promote you." "It's not a promotion," Matteo replied. "It's a project. A test. I don't even know if it'll go anywhere." Anna laughed the way only siblings can, half disbelief, half joy, and a quarter jealousy. "You do realize you're about to be the most talked about guy in that building, right?" Matteo rubbed his eyes. "I didn't ask for that." "No one asks for a miracle either," Anna said. "But sometimes it still shows up. Just don't blow it, okay?" "I don't plan to." When he finally went to bed that night, he lay awake for hours. The fear hadn't left him. If anything, it had grown sharper. But beside it, blooming slowly in the dark, was something rarer. Hope. The next day, Elon didn't waste time. He sent an internal memo, brief and strangely warm. Beginning this quarter, Tesla will be piloting a new internal initiative, Project Lighthouse. Its purpose is simple: listen, reflect, respond. We cannot expect machines to be better than humans if we don't start by treating humans better than machines. Project lead, Matteo Reyes. Support him as you would support me. The memo triggered a cascade. HR reached out to Matteo. IT provisioned access to collaboration tools. A small team was assembled, carefully curated, not for their titles, but for their perspectives. A mix of floor workers, line supervisors, mental wellness advocates, and a single data analyst with a minor in sociology. On the first day of Project Lighthouse, Elon walked into the war room, converted from an old break room with flickering LED lights and half-erased whiteboards, and addressed the team with an ease that was almost uncanny. "You're not here to save the company," he said. "You're here to light up the blind spots. If we get this right, Tesla won't just make the best cars. We'll be the best place people have ever worked." People nodded, some skeptically, some silently moved. But Matteo didn't nod. He just looked Elon in the eye and whispered to himself, "Don't let him down." The next morning, the air inside the factory was different. It wasn't just about what people were saying, it was about how they were acting. Conversations were a little longer. Glances lingered a bit more. People weren't just talking about Elon anymore, they were watching Matteo. Every corner he turned felt like it came with 1,000 eyes. Some curious, some supportive, a few skeptical. Matteo could feel the pressure of every single one. He walked the factory floor with his new badge clipped slightly lower than usual, a detail no one else noticed, but that made him feel slightly more grounded. He wasn't in a supervisory role, Elon had made that clear, but this was something else entirely. A temporary status that felt weightier than a promotion. Project Lighthouse was now officially live. The room they'd converted for the project had been affectionately nicknamed the Watchtower by some engineers. Its walls, once stained with years of coffee steam and forgotten post-it notes, were freshly painted white. There were small potted plants on the windowsills, courtesy of Sarah from HR, and a corkboard with the heading, "Signals You've Noticed." It invited team members to write down moments of burnout, frustration, kindness, or even small victories on index cards and pin them anonymously. The first morning brought only a single card. "Not sure if it matters, but yesterday I saw someone cry in the restroom. I pretended not to notice. I still feel bad about it." Matteo stood there reading that card for a long time. It didn't say much, but it said everything. He pinned a second card underneath it, in his own handwriting. "It matters." Later that day, the Watchtower team had their first roundtable. Elon was there too, standing rather than sitting, as he often did, arms crossed as if trying to hold the whole world in place. He listened more than he spoke, which already set the tone. "I want to start," said Linda, one of the line supervisors. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and widely respected for her no-nonsense attitude. "I had a guy in my team last month start missing steps in inspections. Not huge ones, but enough to raise flags. When I asked him what was going on, he told me his wife had left and he didn't want anyone to know. I reported the missed steps, but not the reason. It didn't feel relevant at the time." She paused. "But now I wonder, how many things have I dismissed because they weren't work-related? Where do we draw that line?" There were nods around the table. Elon's eyes didn't leave hers. "I don't think we draw a line," Matteo said quietly. All heads turned to him, and he felt a familiar tightness in his chest. But he continued, "I think we start asking better questions." That set the tone. Over the next hour, stories poured out, some guarded, some raw. A data analyst named Vic shared how he developed silent migraines from the blue light exposure, but had kept quiet because he didn't want to seem weak. Another tech, Camila, admitted to hiding the fact that her mother was undergoing chemo, afraid it would make people think she was distracted. It became clear that Project Lighthouse wasn't going to be about metrics. It was going to be about honesty and about building something sacred in any workplace, psychological safety. But not everyone saw it that way. By Thursday afternoon, murmurs of dissent began to rise. A few mid-level managers started pushing back. They didn't say outright, but the message was clear. Was this just another soft skills distraction? A vanity project from the top? One manager, Tom Grayson, was especially vocal. "Listen," he said during an impromptu meeting in a logistics pod, "I get the need for empathy. But we're running a production line here, not a therapy center. If every worker starts pinning their personal problems to a board, how long before output drops?" Matteo, who happened to walk by just as Tom said that, didn't stop. But the word stung. Not because Tom was entirely wrong, but because he was echoing a culture that had defined so much of Matteo's working life. Keep your head down. Don't complain. You're lucky to be here. Later that day, Elon pulled Matteo aside. You heard. I heard, Matteo said, arms crossed. Want to fight it? No, Matteo replied. I want to understand it. That response caught Elon off guard. The next day, Matteo requested something bold, an all-hands listening circle, open to anyone with no agenda, just a space to talk. Elon gave the green light, and by the following Monday, a crowd had gathered in the cafeteria, which had been rearranged with folding chairs in a wide circle. What happened over the next 2 hours would become one of the most talked about moments in Tesla's recent history. People cried, people argued, people shared things they hadn't shared in years. A maintenance worker named Troy spoke about the guilt he carried after missing his daughter's school play because of mandatory overtime. A design assistant admitted she'd been faking enthusiasm for months while privately battling depression. Even Tom Grayson showed up. He didn't say anything, but he sat there for over an hour. That meant something. Afterward, Elon walked back to the watchtower with Matteo in silence. The sun was setting through the glass roof, spilling gold across the concrete floor. What do you think? Elon finally asked. Matteo looked up at the fading light. I think we just turned the lights on. The morning after the listening circle, Tesla's Fremont facility felt more like a college campus than a high-performance production hub. The cafeteria still held traces of the powerful emotional current from the day before, chairs slightly out of place, name tags left on tables, sticky notes with raw truths stuck to walls. People walked differently. Conversations sounded less clipped, less guarded. For some, it was energizing. For others, it was unsettling. Elon Musk sat in his private office overlooking one of the assembly floors. He barely slept, not out of stress, but stimulation. There was something electric about the energy they were tapping into, something that felt like it had always existed beneath the surface of this place, buried under layers of productivity and pressure. Now that it was out, Elon didn't want to let it go. But he also knew this kind of change was fragile. He sent Matteo a text just after 7 a.m. Join me on the floor. Quiet walk. No talking. Just watching. Matteo replied with a simple thumbs up and zipped his technician jacket over his hoodie. The walk took them past silent machines beginning to hum back to life, workers greeting each other with nods and raised coffee cups, and one or two still noticeably avoiding eye contact with them both. For 15 minutes, they walked without speaking. Elon had a way of slipping into a meditative state, even in the loudest places. Matteo tried to mirror it, to listen, not just with his ears, but with his whole body. Finally, Elon broke the silence. You notice anything different? Matteo glanced around. People are lingering, talking more. Some look relaxed. Some look lost. Elon nodded. And how do you feel? Matteo considered that. Seen, which is weird. I'm not used to it. Neither is the company, Elon said. But we need to get used to it, if we want to scale. They returned to the watchtower around 8 a.m. The small team that had grown around Project Lighthouse was already gathered. Sarah from HR, Vic from Analytics, Camila from Final Inspection, and Linda, the floor supervisor. Each had their own reason for staying involved, but none of them had expected how fast things were moving. Okay, Elon said, standing at the head of the table. Today, we start mapping. He passed out a rough framework he'd sketched the night before, boxes and arrows linking words like pressure point, burnout signal, and emotional lag. It looked more like a mood tracker than a business strategy. But that was the point. We're not just gathering stories, he explained. We're trying to chart patterns. If we can understand when pressure becomes damage, we can intervene before someone breaks. The idea isn't to prevent stress. It's to create resilience intelligently. Vic raised a question. How will we know the difference between someone just having a bad day and someone quietly drowning? Matteo leaned forward. We ask, consistently, respectfully, anonymously. We build something that's less about metrics and more about signals. I don't want checkboxes. I want conversations." Elon smiled. "Exactly." Over the next 2 hours, the watchtower buzzed with post-it notes, dry erase sketches, and story threads. They created what they called the human map, a living diagram of emotional milestones inside a high-pressure company. It had 3 zones: green flow, yellow fatigue, and red friction. They began plotting situations employees had described: missed birthdays due to overtime, working through illness, unspoken grief, all things that went untracked but hit hard. As they worked, something unexpected happened. Other employees started stopping by, some to ask questions, some just to stand silently at the threshold and watch. One by one, people began adding their own markers to the corkboard. One card read, "I haven't hugged my daughter in a week because I keep coming home after she's asleep." Another said, "I pretended to be sick last Friday. I just couldn't handle coming in. I didn't tell anyone." By lunchtime, there were 30 new cards on the board. But with attention came scrutiny. At 2:30 p.m., Matteo received an email marked confidential from Tesla's legal and risk department. It was short and to the point. "Please clarify the scope and data handling practices of Project Lighthouse. Anonymous reports related to employee well-being may fall under workplace health regulations. Compliance team requests meeting tomorrow morning." Matteo read it twice, then looked up at Elon, who was now cross-legged on the floor, helping Camila color code trends on a giant sheet of paper. "We just got our first internal challenge," Matteo said, holding up the email. Elon took the phone, read the message, and handed it back. "Perfect. Means they noticed." That night, Matteo couldn't sleep. It wasn't fear this time. It was clarity. He sat at his small kitchen table, Sandy asleep again in the next room, and wrote a document called the Invisible Ledger. It was just for him for now. In it, he wrote about all the emotional debts employees rack up while trying to hold it together. The invisible hours, the unspoken guilt, the quiet self-erasure in the name of professionalism. He wrote about dignity, about the right to be human inside a machine. And he ended it with a simple line: "If our best people are breaking silently, we don't have a performance problem, we have a compassion deficit." The next morning, he printed it out and pinned it to the corkboard at the watchtower. By noon, someone had underlined that final sentence and written underneath in thick black marker, "Let's fix that." By the time Friday rolled around, Project Lighthouse had become more than an initiative, it had become a presence. The watchtower, once a quiet converted break room, was now pulsing with foot traffic. Employees came in during breaks just to read the corkboard, pin anonymous thoughts, or share overheard snippets from coworkers. No one was forced to participate, but everyone seemed drawn to it, like moths to a signal fire. But alongside that warmth, something colder was brewing. Not openly, not in memos or confrontations, but in looks exchanged between certain managers, in the slight delay in approvals, in the extra scrutiny applied to non-essential time. The friction began to find a face. Her name was Mara Quinn, a veteran manager in Tesla's logistics optimization unit. Sharp as a scalpel, impeccably dressed even in factory conditions, and known for her ability to hit delivery targets with brutal precision. She wasn't cruel, but she was ruthlessly efficient. And efficiency to her meant control. On Friday morning, she walked into the watchtower unannounced. Matteo was seated at the table with Vic and Camila, organizing the latest feedback data into clusters when she arrived. Her heels clicked on the concrete like punctuation marks. "Matteo Reyes," she said, not quite a question. He stood up politely. "Yes, I need a moment." He motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing. "Privately," she added. They stepped outside into the corridor, just beyond the earshot of the team. The industrial hum of the building wrapped around them like static. "I've reviewed the report you submitted yesterday," Mara began. "And I've spoken to legal and HR about the emotional tracking framework you're proposing." Matteo's stomach tensed. "Okay, I'm not here to shut you down," she said, "but I want you to understand something clearly. The moment you start measuring the intangible, you invite subjective interpretation, and that invites inconsistency. We've built this company on precision, on repeatability. If what you're doing begins to blur that line, it won't matter how noble it is. It will be dismantled. He studied her expression, measured, unthreatening, but firm. She wasn't here to scare him. She was here to draw a line. With respect, Matteo replied, precision without empathy builds cold systems. And cold systems don't scale either. They crack under pressure because no one's looking for the signs. Mara crossed her arms. You're an idealist. I'm a tired dad who fell asleep on a bench and got lucky, he said honestly. But I think if we don't make space for what's real, we'll lose the people who are keeping this whole thing alive. There was a pause. You have until the end of the month, Mara said. If by then you don't have a reproducible framework that leadership can understand and quantify, I'll recommend we pull the plug. Then she walked away, heels clicking again like a clock counting down. Matteo returned to the watchtower, quieter than usual. The team noticed, but no one pressed. Instead, Elon arrived 20 minutes later, holding a familiar paper coffee cup and a small folded blueprint. You've seen it? Elon asked, tossing the blueprint on the table. Matteo nodded. She gave us until the end of the month. Elon leaned back in the chair, one leg crossed. Good. Deadlines make things real. But what if the very nature of what we're doing can't be quantified? Then we translate it into something they can feel, Elon said. We build a demo, a walkthrough experience, real voices, real data, real stories. People don't remember reports. They remember how they felt in a room. Matteo's eyes widened. You want to prototype empathy? Why not? Over the next week, the team doubled down. Camila began collecting recorded anonymous testimonials, short audio clips from workers across departments. Vic created an internal dashboard that didn't just show productivity, but also overlaid metrics like consecutive days worked, hours beyond shift, and repeated schedule swaps, proxy signals for fatigue. Sarah designed a set of visual metaphors for common emotional states, a tangled wire for anxiety, a cracked foundation for burnout, a dim light for loss of purpose. They called it the empathy engine. It wasn't software. It wasn't a product. It was an experience. A mobile booth, roughly the size of a shipping container, outfitted with immersive audio, real-time displays, physical artifacts, and a guided narration that walked participants through the emotional layers of the Tesla workforce. It didn't name names. It didn't shame anyone. It simply illuminated what had always been there. The first test run was held in the north lot, between the brake area and the old battery test lab. Elon insisted on being the first to go through. He emerged 20 minutes later, eyes glassy, lips tight, and simply said, "People need to feel this." Over the following week, nearly 300 employees voluntarily entered the empathy engine. Many left in silence. Some cried. A few stayed in the watchtower for hours afterward, just sitting with the team. But what Matteo remembered most was the man who walked out on the third day. Early 30s, arms tattooed with welding symbols, grease still under his nails. He looked at Matteo, paused, then simply said, "You showed me my own life from the outside. I didn't know how tired I was." That sentence stuck with Matteo like a bell he couldn't unhear. But as momentum built, so did the stakes. Mara Quinn returned. This time not alone, but with two members from the compliance and operational continuity team. They weren't here to talk. They were here to observe. Clipboards in hand, tight-lipped. Matteo welcomed them. He wasn't afraid, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't just reacting to a job. He was defending something he believed in. Not for his sake, but for everyone who had ever felt invisible under fluorescent lights. The Monday following the public testing of the empathy engine felt like the beginning of a second wave. The first had been emotional, raw, human. But the second was institutional. The shift had reached leadership, policy advisors, and the many layers of Tesla's intricate command chain. And with that, the tone subtly changed. No longer was this just a group of workers experimenting with honesty. It had become a subject of strategy meetings. Mateo Reyes walked through the central atrium of the Fremont facility with a different kind of awareness now. He wasn't invisible anymore, not even to those who might have preferred he stayed that way. The janitor greeted him by name. A line worker offered a quiet fist bump. But there was also tension. The kind that comes when people start wondering if you've crossed a line, one they never had the privilege to even approach. By the time Mateo reached the watchtower that morning, a printed copy of a formal internal report was already on the table. Vic had highlighted the title in orange. Preliminary findings and cultural risks related to Project Lighthouse deployment. Sarah, who had just returned from a weekend spent compiling feedback from the Empathy Engine booth, stood near the window with a stiff posture. "They're reviewing everything now," she said. "Compliance, PR, HR, investor relations. They're trying to figure out what box to put this in." Mateo skimmed the executive summary. The language was careful, respectful on the surface, but riddled with corporate hedging. Terms like unverified psychological indicators, internal disruption potential, and unmodeled productivity impacts. It read like they were talking about a software bug, not a collective awakening. "Did Elon see this?" Mateo asked. "He will," Sarah said. "They're probably trying to get ahead of his reaction." As if on cue, Elon walked in. No security, no entourage. Just his usual understated presence that somehow always made the room feel like a whiteboard waiting to be filled. He picked up the report, flipped through it quickly, then tossed it gently back onto the table. "I've read worse. What do we do now?" Vic asked. Elon looked at Mateo. "We keep building." But Mateo hesitated, because for the first time since this all started, he wasn't sure what that meant. That afternoon, a second memo hit everyone's inboxes, stakeholder listening sessions. In response to the growing attention around Project Lighthouse, Tesla's leadership would begin a series of structured forums to gather concerns, impressions, and suggestions. Not open-ended circles like the one in the cafeteria. No, these would be moderated, controlled, curated. The first was scheduled for Wednesday. Mateo was invited to sit on the panel. He didn't sleep much the night before. Santi had come down with a fever, and between cool compresses and children's Tylenol, Mateo found himself staring at the ceiling, hearing his own heartbeat. He wasn't afraid of speaking. He was afraid of being misunderstood, of the movement losing its soul to procedure and policy. Wednesday morning arrived under a gray sky. The meeting was held in a sleek conference room known internally as the Vault, a room usually reserved for high-stakes design reviews and crisis control meetings. This time, it hosted 12 people: engineers, floor workers, HR leads, managers, and a few blank-faced compliance officers who took notes without blinking. Mateo sat in the middle of the long, oval table. Elon sat 3 seats to his left, silent and watchful. Across from them, Mara Quinn read from a prepared statement about balancing innovation with operational integrity. The words felt smooth, pre-approved, surgically precise. Then it was Mateo's turn. He didn't use notes. He didn't raise his voice. He just told the truth. "I'm not here to say the Empathy Engine is perfect, or that Project Lighthouse has it all figured out. But I do know this: we've tapped into something that's real. We're hearing voices that haven't spoken in years. Not because they were silenced, but because they never thought anyone cared enough to listen. If we ignore that now, just because it doesn't fit neatly into a dashboard, we'll be losing more than we think." The room was still. Then someone spoke. A woman from the Energy Systems team, mid-40s, hair tied back in a bun. "My team had 3 people go through the Empathy Engine. One of them asked for therapy for the first time in their life. Another told me he's reconsidering quitting. The third hasn't said anything, but he's been showing up on time again. I don't need a KPI to tell me that's progress." That moment cracked something open. Not completely, but enough. After the session, Elon caught up with Mateo in the hallway. "You handled that well," he said. "Better than I would have." Mateo smiled faintly. "You built the machine. I just told him how it feels from the inside." Elon nodded. "It's time we made how people feel part of the design process." Mateo stopped walking. "You mean make empathy part of engineering?" Elon looked back at him. No, make it part of leadership. That night, the watchtower stayed open late. Matteo stayed even later. He cleaned the whiteboard, organized the sticky notes, replaced a few broken pins. Then he sat down at the table, pulled out his notebook, and began to write a new heading at the top of a fresh page. What we can't measure, we must protect. It was becoming clear now. The project wasn't just about policies or systems. It was about protecting the parts of people that too often get sacrificed in the name of progress. And somewhere inside that quiet room, with only the hum of distant machines outside and the low buzz of a vending machine behind him, Matteo felt a resolve settle into his chest. He wasn't afraid of the resistance anymore. Because when the heart of a company starts beating louder than the noise of the machine, it's a sound you can't ignore. The next few days at Tesla felt like a tug-of-war between momentum and resistance. While the Watchtower team continued to refine the empathy engine and translate feedback into actionable insights, the broader system, legal, operations, even portions of upper management began to press back more visibly. Not overtly, not with shutdowns, but with the soft friction of bureaucracy. Slower approvals, more meetings, layers of oversight that hadn't existed before. Matteo felt it most when trying to coordinate a second listening circle, this time in the Gigafactory annex near the logistics wing. It had taken him only 2 hours to organize the first one. This time, it took 3 days, 5 emails, and a calendar approval that kept mysteriously getting rescheduled. Still, the movement didn't stall. It evolved. Inside the Watchtower, the corkboard had to be expanded. There were now 2 more panels, each crowded with notes. Some cheerful, some heartbreaking. One, written in green pen on a torn envelope, read simply, "I stopped feeling invisible last week. That hasn't happened in years." Another said, "I don't know if I'm burnt out or just exhausted, but at least now I'm not pretending everything's fine." One day, while Vic and Sarah debated color-coding themes based on emotional intensity, a voice came from a doorway. "Excuse me, is this where the listening project is?" It was an older man, probably in his late 50s, with gray streaks in his hair and oil stains on his hands. His name tag read D. Ramirez Welding. Matteo stood. "Yeah, this is it. You're welcome to come in." Ramirez stepped into the room, looked at the notes, then back at Matteo. "I don't do computers much, or emails, but I got a story. I'd like someone to hear it. You got time?" Matteo nodded and pulled out a chair. Ramirez sat and talked for 37 minutes. He told Matteo about working 3 shifts in a row after his brother died because he didn't know how to ask for time off, about missing his daughter's graduation, about the way he pretended not to hear jokes that hurt, about how last week someone on the floor told him they heard about a new thing where you could say the truth and not get fired. Matteo listened without interruption. When Ramirez finished, he stood up, thanked him, and left. Later, Matteo wrote down every detail he could remember, not because he needed the data, but because he didn't want the story to disappear. That night, he stayed in the Watchtower long after everyone left. The fluorescent lights buzzed gently above him as he read through dozens of new notes, some barely legible. His eyes were tired, his back hurt, but he felt rooted, like he was exactly where he needed to be. Then, just after midnight, his phone buzzed. A message from Elon. "You up?" Matteo smirked. "Yeah, still at the Watchtower." A pause. "Come to the design studio. I want to show you something." 15 minutes later, Matteo entered one of Tesla's lesser-known wings, the prototype lab. Most of the company's flagship projects passed through here in secrecy before ever being revealed to the public. Elon was standing beside a large digital table surrounded by white boards filled with scribbles and diagrams. On the screen was a draft for a new internal initiative labeled Code Gray. "What is this?" Matteo asked, stepping closer. "It's an expansion," Elon replied. "You helped me see something, that we've been building resilience into machines but ignoring it in people. This idea, it's a safety protocol. For humans." He swiped through the concept. Any employee in any department can invoke a code gray if they're reaching a breaking point. It triggers a private support flag. No penalty, no PR, just a signal. From there, a trained peer responder checks in real conversation. No scripts, just support. Mateo was quiet. Elon continued, "It's not a panic button. It's not therapy. It's recognition. We build in redundancy for our hardware. Why not our hearts?" Mateo nodded slowly. "And what if leadership thinks it's weakness?" "Then leadership needs to evolve," Elon said without hesitation. "And if we model it right, it becomes culture." He turned to Mateo. "I want you to help build it." The offer wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't an ego stroke. It was real. And Mateo felt the weight of it, equal parts honor and responsibility. "I'm in," he said. They worked together until almost 3 a.m., mapping out triggers, confidentiality flows, and language framing. They debated words like overload versus pause and settled on a symbol, a small gray circle with a single ripple around it, barely noticeable, but undeniably present. By the time Mateo finally made it home, Sandy was already waking up, shuffling into the kitchen with his tiny dinosaur slippers. Mateo scooped him up and sat with him on the couch, exhausted but filled with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Not the kind that came with promotions or plaques, but the kind that came from knowing you were helping build something that mattered, something that could outlive you. Back at the factory, the first digital prototype for Code Gray launched on an internal server. No announcement, no fanfare, just a small button that appeared in the employee dashboard with the label, "I need a moment." Within the first hour, it was pressed 17 times by people in all departments, and none of them were logged. They weren't analyzed. They were acknowledged. That was the difference. By the time Friday arrived, the quiet rollout of Code Gray had rippled through Tesla's internal culture like a soft but undeniable wave. There had been no company-wide announcement, no banner on the homepage, no mandatory training. Just a button, tucked into the employee dashboard, labeled simply, "I need a moment." And yet, that was all it took. Within days, stories began circulating. A robotics engineer in Nevada pressed it during a panic attack and found herself in a 10-minute call with a colleague who simply listened without judgment. A janitorial supervisor in Buffalo, worn thin by double shifts and elder care, used it to flag a quiet burnout and was later granted rotation shift change without needing to justify anything. Small, almost invisible acts of grace. No paperwork, no performance evaluations, just space. But with every quiet act of progress came the creeping presence of doubt from the machine that didn't understand the language of emotion. At the Fremont site, a new term began circulating behind closed doors, lighthouse fatigue. Some department heads, especially those trained to equate productivity with perfection, started referring to the project in whispers, as if it were a virus. They questioned whether vulnerability had become trendy, whether Tesla was drifting too far into soft culture. Mateo first heard it in the break room. "I mean, it's all well and good," a logistics coordinator muttered over a sandwich, "but how long before someone uses this stuff to dodge responsibility?" The words weren't meant for him, but he heard them anyway, and they stung. Later that day, Elon sent him a brief message. "Time to take it public. Next town hall. You lead it." Mateo blinked at the screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because the idea of standing in front of hundreds, maybe thousands of employees, and explaining a system born from his most vulnerable moment felt like stepping onto a stage without armor. He typed back, "What's the goal?" Elon's reply came quickly. "Show them it's real, that it works, that it's not weakness, it's resilience." Mateo spent the weekend building a presentation, but it didn't look like any other Tesla deck. There were no graphs, no stacked bars, no optimization charts. There were voices, faces, moments. He embedded clips of testimonials, blurred for privacy. Photos of the corkboard, a voice note from Ramirez, a still shot of the "I need a moment" button with 17 responses on the first day, then 32 the next, then 48. Not stats. Signals. Ripples. The morning of the town hall, he arrived early. The stage was already set in the main atrium, where sunlight poured through the ceiling in long strips, painting gold across the polished floor. Folding chairs were arranged in arcs. A projector glowed faintly against the tall white wall. Someone had even set up a table with coffee and donuts, one of those simple kindnesses no one asks for, but everyone appreciates. When Matteo stepped onto the stage, the room was about half full. Elon stood near the back. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just watched, hands in his pockets. Matteo cleared his throat and began. "I'm not a speaker," he started, voice steady but low. "I'm not an engineer or a strategist or someone who's ever been on this side of a microphone. I'm a technician. I work shifts. I've swept floors. I've fallen asleep during breaks. That's where this started." A few chuckles, then silence. He clicked the remote and showed the first slide, Matteo's corkboard packed with notes. "This is the watchtower. What started as a few conversations became this. Dozens of employees from all departments have contributed to this board. Not because they had to, but because they needed to." Slide 2. A blurred image of the Empathy Engine booth. We built something we didn't know we needed. A space to understand ourselves before the system misunderstands us. Slide 3. A short audio clip. I didn't want to press the button. I thought it meant I was weak, but gave me 5 minutes to breathe, and that saved my day. Matteo paused and looked out at the crowd. More people had arrived. He could see familiar faces. Sarah, Vic, Camila, even Mara Quinn, sitting with her legs crossed, arms folded, watching with her usual inscrutable expression. "I know some of you are skeptical," Matteo said. "I know this looks different. It feels different. But maybe that's the point. Everything else in this company is designed for performance. This is designed for people. We can't optimize the human soul, but we can protect it." The room went still. Then something remarkable happened. One of the audience members stood up. It was an assembly lead named Jamil, someone Matteo had only met in passing. He had strong arms, grease-streaked overalls, and the kind of presence that usually filled a room. But now he looked small, vulnerable. "I used code gray last week," Jamil said. "Didn't tell anyone. Just hit the button because I couldn't stop thinking about something I didn't say to my brother before he passed. It kept rattling around in my chest. I thought I could power through it, but I couldn't. And I didn't have to, because someone answered. No script, no lecture, just a voice that said, 'Hey, I got you for a minute.'" He paused, eyes glassy. That voice saved me. A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd. Matteo didn't speak. He didn't need to. The town hall ended without applause, without fanfare. Just silence. Reflection. A room of people who had been given something real and who didn't quite know how to process it. Later that day, Elon passed Matteo in the hallway. He said only one thing. "You didn't just start a project. You started a language." The week following the town hall felt strangely still. Not in a lifeless way, but in a breath-held kind of way. The kind of stillness that settles in after something unspoken has finally been said aloud. People walked the factory floor a little differently. Some slower, some more thoughtful. A few with their shoulders a bit straighter, as if something heavy had been set down. Matteo Reyes returned to his routine, though routine had taken on a new shape. His mornings now started not only with coffee and checking tools, but also reviewing messages that filtered in through the Watchtower inbox. The digital corkboard had gone live across all Tesla sites, allowing employees to submit reflections, concerns, or quiet triumphs anonymously. In just 3 days, the server was handling over 300 entries. Some were simple. Took a full lunch break today for the first time in 4 months. Others were heavier. My son's birthday is tomorrow. I'm working a double. Again, I didn't tell him. Some had no words at all, just a period, or a question mark, as if that was all someone could manage. Matteo made a rule. Every entry would be read, not skimmed. Read, not by a bot, not by an algorithm, but by a human being. Most days, that person was him. That Wednesday, as he sat at his desk surrounded by handwritten notes and quiet determination, Elon appeared at the doorway without knocking. He did that sometimes not out of rudeness, but because he treated physical presence like data. If it's relevant, it appears. You ever get tired of being the lightning rod? Elon asked, walking in. I didn't know I was one, Matteo replied. You are now, Elon said. Every shift lead who wants to roll back code gray routes their emails to me. They're worried. Matteo leaned back. Worried about what? Losing control of the narrative, of the pace, of what they call the structure. Elon pulled a folded sheet of paper from his back pocket and laid it on the table. It was a printed Slack message thread, names redacted. The messages read, "We used to measure output by units per hour. Now we're measuring feelings. Morale is important, but this is starting to feel like therapy hour. One of my guys is using code gray to clock out mentally. How do we draw a line?" Matteo read the thread quietly, then looked up. They're not wrong to ask. This isn't easy to quantify. No, Elon said. It's not, but that doesn't mean it's not real. He paced the room. Tesla has always been about building what people say can't be built. Cars that drive themselves, rockets that land, energy grids that don't crash, and now maybe a workplace that doesn't quietly eat its people alive. Matteo stood, rubbing his forehead. So what do? We go deeper, Elon said. We take this beyond experiments and policies. We make it part of how we lead. He pulled up a slide on the screen titled, Emotional Engineering, Phase 1. It had only 3 bullet points. Normalize pause. Reward reflection. Design for dignity. Matteo read it twice. You think we can actually do this? Elon didn't answer. Not directly. He just looked at the board filled with anonymous messages and said, we already are. That afternoon, they broadened the design team from Tesla's internal UI/UX division. Bright minds usually tasked with interfaces for vehicles or dashboards for engineers. This time, their mission was different, to reimagine how emotion could be represented not as weakness, but as awareness. The challenge was deceptively simple. How do you let someone signal that they're not okay, without needing to explain themselves? One designer, a soft-spoken man named Ishan, sketched a quiet idea, a soft pulse icon that would appear next to your employee profile. Gray when all was stable, yellow when someone had flagged they were fatigued, and red only if they initiated a code gray. But importantly, the status would never say why. It would never demand justification. It would only ask one thing from others, understanding. They called it the ripple. No one would be forced to use it, but anyone could. That evening, as the team reviewed early mock-ups, Camila brought in news from the floor. You should hear this, she said, holding up her tablet and playing back an audio clip. It was from a team leader in final assembly. I didn't think this project would matter to me. But one of my guys, Jose, he's usually upbeat, always singing. He went silent last week. Press code gray. I didn't know what to say, so I just walked with him for 10 minutes. We didn't talk about anything serious. But when we got back, he just nodded and said, thanks for not fixing me. Just walking with me. I've been thinking about that sentence for days. Matteo felt it in his chest. There were no blueprints for this kind of leadership. No manuals. No SOPs. Just presence. That weekend, Tesla's internal blog published a quiet piece titled, Making Space. It wasn't promotional. It wasn't even signed. It was a simple reflection that ended with this line. What we measure grows. What we ignore erodes. And sometimes, the most powerful system isn't the one that speeds us up. It's the one that knows when to help us slow down. The post was shared hundreds of times internally. One comment stood out. For the first time, I feel like I don't have to leave part of myself at the door. That Monday, a new phrase appeared on the welcome screen of every employee terminal at Tesla. Just 3 words. You matter here. And beneath it, in smaller font. If you need a moment, take it. If someone else does, honor it. Matteo stood in the watchtower that morning, watching people pass by. Some noticed the message. Some smiled. Some didn't react at all. But he could feel the shift, not in metrics or memos, but in the air. In the way people nodded a little slower when they greeted each other. In how no one rushed to interrupt when someone paused to collect their thoughts. In how the factory, for all its speed and innovation, had finally made space for stillness. If the first 10 blocks of Project Lighthouse were about awakening, then Block 11 was about endurance. A quiet, durable kind of strength that doesn't show up in slogans or town halls, but in what happens after the dust settles. After the excitement cools. After the eyes of leadership turn to other pressing matters. Because the truth was this: while momentum had shifted, not everything had changed. And Matteo knew that better than anyone. The Watchtower had become both sanctuary and battleground. Every day, more stories poured in, some from voices that had never spoken before. A line worker in Nevada wrote about carrying guilt for 5 years after a teammate's injury. A designer in Berlin sent a message that began, "I haven't cried in front of anyone since I was 13, until last week." But for every note of honesty, there was pushback. Code Gray had triggered conversations in boardrooms where emotion had long been seen as risk. "We're not therapists," someone had said in a finance alignment call. "We're engineers. We solve. We don't sit in feelings." Matteo heard these reports secondhand, but he didn't dismiss them. He understood that discomfort was part of change. What mattered now was holding the space open long enough for something lasting to take root. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Camila walked into the Watchtower with a box under her arm and a strange look in her eyes. "What's that?" Matteo asked. She placed the box on the center table and opened it. Inside were dozens of small, sealed envelopes, each labeled with a first name and a date. "They're letters," she said, "from employees to themselves. Reflections, fears, hopes. Some of them from the empathy engine sessions. Some from people who couldn't speak out loud, but still wanted to leave something behind." Matteo picked one up. It read, "Dear me, stop pretending you're okay just because you're afraid to slow down." Another, "If no one tells you they see you, let me be the first, I do." Camila looked at him. "What do we do with them?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a marker and walked to the wall where the corkboards ended. "I think we need a new board," he said. They called it the mirror, a space not for anonymous notes, but for personal truth, archived and protected. A closed box was mounted beneath it for people to leave their own sealed letters. Not to be read, not to be analyzed, just to be honored. Meanwhile, Elon was beginning to push the boundaries of what Project Lighthouse could become. At a meeting with a subset of the senior executive team, he presented a slide titled, "Emotion as Infrastructure." He stood in front of it, arms loose, tone deceptively casual. "We've spent the last 2 decades building physical systems, roads, rockets, rails. But we've underinvested in the emotional infrastructure that makes those systems sustainable." A VP raised his hand. "What does that even look like in practice?" Elon clicked to the next slide. It showed 3 concentric circles. Personal pause systems, internal tools like Code Gray, the Ripple, and self-check prompts. Interpersonal signals, safe language, presence training, team empathy calibration. Cultural resilience, feedback loops that reward dignity, not just performance. "We treat hardware faults as inevitable," Elon said. "But when a human has a fault, we blame them. What if we treated emotional overload like a system response? Not a flaw, a flag." There were nods. Some slow, some guarded. But it was clear, the idea wasn't going away. That Friday, Matteo stood at the edge of the battery testing floor, watching teams work through a new diagnostics routine. He wasn't there as a technician anymore. But sometimes he returned to where it all began, to remember what it meant to work while carrying more than people could see. He noticed a familiar figure across the room. Jamil, the assembly lead who had stood up during the town hall, was helping a newer tech adjust a harness. They were laughing, not loudly, just enough to remind Matteo what it looked like when someone got their air back. Later, as he walked back through the main corridor, he passed a hallway where two people stood facing each other. One was speaking softly. The other was just listening. Neither noticed him, but he slowed as he walked by. Because now, he could see it everywhere, the ripple. Small acts of presence, moments of pause, words not spoken just to fill space, but to hold it open. Back in the watchtower, the letters kept coming. Camila had started logging the date of each one, not the content, just the arrival. She marked them on a calendar with tiny red dots. By the end of the month, the board looked like it had caught fire. On the last day of the quarter, Elon sent out an internal note titled "Next Phase." It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a celebration. It was a reminder. We didn't build this to be trendy. We built it because no one else would. The measure of our success won't be in retention rates or PR headlines. It'll be in the stories that never had to be written because someone was seen in time. Keep going. Matteo printed the message and pinned it beside the mirror. That night, he stayed late again, just him and Camila. They sat quietly for a while, drinking tea from mismatched mugs. She finally said, "Do you ever wonder why it was you? Why you were the one who had to fall asleep for this to start?" Matteo looked at her, and the answer came more easily than he expected. "Because I needed to wake up." Camila smiled. No more words were needed. Because sometimes silence is the only thing loud enough to hold the truth. Real change is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself with confetti or trumpet blasts. It happens slowly between meetings, beneath the chatter, in the quiet recalibration of how people treat each other when no one's watching. And inside the Fremont facility, that quiet shift was underway. It had been just over 2 months since Matteo Reyes had fallen asleep on a bench and unknowingly set into motion a ripple Tesla had never seen coming. Now, every hallway whispered with new language. Words like space, grace, and pause had begun weaving themselves into daily routines previously dominated by output charts and shipping deadlines. But this was the most fragile part, because once the shock wore off, once the attention faded, it would be easy for the system to snap back into its old shape unless someone kept holding the space open. On Monday morning, a printed card appeared in the watchtower mailbox. It was handwritten and signed and folded carefully in thirds. "I'm not ready to share my name, but this project saved my life. I was spiraling quietly. No one saw it, but I used the code gray. Just once. And someone called. And that changed everything. Please don't let this fade. Not now. Not after so many of us finally said something." Matteo read the card 3 times. Then, without a word, he pinned it to the center of the mirror. By noon, 5 more letters had arrived. Some with names, some still anonymous. But the message was the same. Please, keep going. Elon Musk arrived later that afternoon with a rare visitor, a woman named Dana Lee, a leadership strategist from outside Tesla, who had been consulting quietly with Elon for the past year. Dana was sharp, composed, and spoke with a precision that made people stop what they were doing and pay attention. She stood inside the watchtower, slowly reading the corkboards, then turning to face Matteo and Camila. "You've done something I've never seen in a corporate setting," she said. Matteo raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "You've created an emotional culture that doesn't require branding to function. People are participating because it feels human, not because it looks good in a quarterly report." Camila nodded. "That's the hope." Dana walked closer to the mirror, ran her fingers lightly across the sealed envelopes, then turned back to Elon. "If you want this to last," she said, "you'll have to embed it structurally. Not just in culture, but in cadence. Make it part of onboarding. Tie it into peer reviews. Create rituals around it, not processes, rituals. Otherwise, it'll be seen as a phase." Elon looked at Matteo. "You hear that?" "I do," Matteo said, "and I agree." That night, a new protocol was drafted, not a replacement for Code Gray, but a deepening of it. They called it the Reset Ritual. Once per quarter, every department would designate 1 hour, a sacred hour, where no production would be pushed, no targets tracked. Instead, the hour would be used for reflection. It could be silence. It could be storytelling. It could be walking in pairs, checking in with someone you hadn't spoken to in a while. But it had to be human, it had to be present, and it had to be real. The idea was simple: if machines need resets, so do people. When the first reset ritual took place, not everyone knew what to do. Some teams stood awkwardly in silence. Others laughed nervously, unsure of how to begin. But by the end of that hour, something subtle had occurred. People were talking, really talking. A technician in paint prep apologized to a teammate for a harsh word said during a rush delivery last week. Two engineers shared memories of family members lost during the pandemic, something neither had spoken about before. A shift lead brought in a photo of his dog, who had passed recently, and left it on the table with a single post-it beside it that said, "Still my best listener." Matteo and Camila walked through the building slowly during the ritual, not to enforce anything, but to feel the atmosphere. In one room, they saw someone sitting alone, head down. In another, a circle had formed, quiet and reverent. It wasn't uniform, but it was honest, and that was enough. Later that week, a letter arrived addressed to Matteo personally. Inside was a photograph, grainy, printed on regular paper. It showed a young boy in a toy Tesla shirt standing next to an older man with a familiar uniform. "This is my son," the note said. "He asked me why I smile more now. I didn't have the words, so I just told him, because I finally feel seen. Thank you for helping make that happen." Matteo kept that photo in his locker, not for pride, but as proof. That Friday evening, as the factory lights dimmed and the end of another high-output week came to a close, Elon joined Matteo on the upper walkway overlooking the floor. They stood in silence for a long while. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I just walked by you that morning?" Elon asked. "I do," Matteo replied. "A lot." "What do you think would have happened?" Matteo shrugged. "I think you would have forgotten me, and I would have kept surviving. But maybe something in both of us would have stayed asleep." Elon nodded slowly. "Good thing we woke up then." They stood together, not as CEO and technician, but as two humans who had stumbled into the same moment of clarity and refused to let go of it. And as the last of the shifts signed out and the machines slowly wound down, something deeper stayed awake inside those walls. Not a program, not a feature, but a promise. To pay attention, to listen sooner, to ask the quiet question before the loud one. And in that quiet, something new had been built, something invisible but stronger than steel. The sound of machines starting up at dawn had always defined the rhythm of Tesla's Fremont factory. But lately, that rhythm had softened ever so slightly, as if the gears of the operation had remembered the human pulse behind the hum. Matteo Reyes noticed it most during the early hours when he walked the floor before the noise reached full pitch. Workers moved with the same urgency, but their expressions were different. Less mechanical, more aware. There was eye contact now, nods that lasted an extra beat, smiles that seemed less automatic. That morning, as he passed through the logistics wing, a shift supervisor named Neil waved him over. "Got a weird one," Neil said, holding up a tablet. One of the guys triggered code gray, but said he didn't want a call back. He just wanted someone to know he was having a rough morning, didn't need help, just acknowledgement. Matteo nodded. "That's valid. Not everyone needs to talk. Sometimes just being seen is enough." Neil scratched his head. "Feels strange not to do something, though." "Is doing something," Matteo replied. He reached out. "You read it. He knows that. That's more than he had yesterday." Neil looked at the tablet again, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, okay, I get that." Moments like that were becoming more common and more complicated. With each wave of growth, Project Lighthouse revealed new layers, not just burnout or grief, but dignity, agency, and the need for boundaries even in vulnerability. Matteo had learned the hard way that empathy, when misunderstood, could be twisted into something performative, or worse, obligatory. That's why he and Camila had begun working on a new branch of the initiative, the Circle of Consent. The idea was simple but radical. Before offering help, ask if it's wanted. Before asking someone to share, ask if they feel safe. Consent not just in touch or time, but in emotion. Camila called it empathy with edges. They prototyped the model during a voluntary session with the manufacturing team. Chairs in a circle, each person given 3 cards, green, yellow, red. Green meant, I'm open to talk. Yellow meant, I'm here, but not ready to speak. Red meant, I need silence. No one was pressured. No one was called on. What happened surprised even Matteo. The entire group stayed an hour past the scheduled time. And not everyone spoke, but everyone stayed. At the end, a welder named Tasha approached Matteo. I didn't say anything, she said, but that red card, that meant the world to me. I've sat in meetings my whole life where I had to pretend I was okay. Today was the first time silence didn't feel like failure. Matteo told Elon about the session later that evening. They were walking the perimeter of the new energy storage annex, where early prototypes of microgrid solutions were being installed. We're learning that silence has a role, Matteo said. It's not the absence of engagement. It's a form of it. Elon walked in silence for a bit, then said, you know what scares most people about this? It's not the vulnerability. It's the mirror. When people slow down, they start seeing things they've been avoiding. And leaders, especially, aren't always ready for that reflection. Are you? Matteo asked. Elon smiled faintly. Most days? No, but I show up anyway. Back in the watchtower, the mirror wall was now completely full. Letters layered over letters. They had started pinning new ones to the ceiling beams, even tucking a few into the joints of the furniture. Every square inch held someone's truth. One evening, Camila found a note folded under the coffee machine. No envelope, just a crumpled sheet of lined paper. I wasn't sure where to put this. I don't really believe in systems, but this room feels different. So here it is. My brother died last year. I never told anyone at work. I kept showing up, kept clocking in, but I wasn't there. Not really, until last week, when someone said, you look quiet, want to walk? I didn't walk. I just said thanks. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost. Camila didn't add it to the wall. She placed it gently in the box below the mirror and closed the lid. Some things she believed belonged to silence. Later that week, Tesla's internal comms team asked Matteo and Camila if they'd be willing to participate in a short documentary-style video about the evolution of Lighthouse. Neither was comfortable being in the spotlight, but after some discussion, they agreed on one condition. The video wouldn't feature dramatic music. No voiceover, just the watchtower. Footage of the room, the letters, the faces, the pauses. Real, raw, unpolished. The video, titled Where We Pause, was released quietly on the internal network. It wasn't promoted, just posted. Within 48 hours, it had over 10,000 views. Comments flooded in from other sites: Shanghai, Berlin, Austin, Buffalo. We want a watchtower here. I've been waiting for something like this my whole career. I didn't know anyone else felt like me. Thank you. That's when Elon made the decision. He sent out a company-wide memo. No frills, no branding. We're making the watchtower global. Every major Tesla site will have a space. Not a room for complaints. A room for truth. A room for breath. If you're reading this, you are already part of it. Matteo sat with the email open on his screen for a long time. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just breathed. Because some milestones don't need applause. They need presence. And as the week closed and the watchtower lights dimmed again, Matteo stood beneath the mirror and whispered, "We see you. We still do." And behind him, as always, Camila was there. Not speaking, just present. At some point, the watchtower stopped being a room and became something else entirely. A rhythm, a reflex, a space that lived not just inside the Fremont facility, but inside people. You could see it in the way co-workers paused a moment longer before responding, in how leaders walked into meetings with a different kind of awareness, and in the unexpected places where vulnerability began to take root. Camila had always believed this movement wasn't about making people more emotional, it was about making emotion more welcome. And now, that belief was being tested. Because as Project Lighthouse expanded globally, with watchtower spaces quietly blooming in Shanghai, Berlin, Austin, and even smaller support hubs, some leaders embraced it fully. Others, however, didn't. In Berlin, a report surfaced that a local supervisor had torn down part of the mirror wall, calling it a distraction from real work. No one was punished. Officially, the memo said it had been a misunderstanding. But the message echoed across internal forums. Not every place was ready to hold this kind of honesty. Matteo read the post 3 times in silence. "I guess it's starting to hit limits," he said to Camilla as they sat near the watchtower's front window. The sky was pale blue outside, quiet as glass. Camilla set down her mug. Everything real eventually meets resistance. Doesn't mean it isn't working, just means it's alive. Matteo looked at her, grateful again for how she always distilled chaos into clarity. "We should go to Berlin." "What?" "I'm serious," he said. "Let's show up. Quietly. Not to lecture. Just to listen." Within a week, the trip was arranged. Elon approved it with no red tape. "Make it human," was all he said. And so they did. When Matteo and Camilla arrived at the Berlin plant, it was colder than expected. The factory was sleek and efficient, Tesla precision in full display. But there was something muted in the atmosphere. Conversations were short. Laughter was scarce. Even eye contact felt rationed. The watchtower there was small. A side room next to the HR office. It held a few pinned notes, some untouched tea mugs, and a thin layer of dust on the corkboard. No mirror wall, no letters. Just a laminated sheet on the table explaining what Project Lighthouse was supposed to be. Camilla didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They began by sitting in silence. 2 visitors. Not judging, not correcting, just present. After an hour, a young man with a buzz cut and a nervous expression entered the room. His name was Emil. He didn't introduce himself right away. Just looked at Matteo and asked, "You're him, right? The one who fell asleep?" Matteo nodded. Emil laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "They said you were coming. I didn't believe it." He sat. Then unexpectedly he cried. "I didn't mean to tear down the letters," he said. "It wasn't me, but I didn't stop it either. I just watched, and I've been thinking about that every day since." Matteo leaned forward, voice gentle. "It's not too late." They spent 3 days in Berlin, not leading, not lecturing, just being there, sharing coffee, listening to stories, sitting in silence. By the time they left, the mirror wall had been rebuilt, this time not on a corkboard, but projected onto a wall using a simple digital interface. Employees could scan a QR code, write their thoughts privately, and watch as their presence lit up a constellation on the screen. A map of voices. One night after returning, Matteo received a message from Emil. "We had 6 new stars appear today. I think that means something." He smiled. Back in Fremont, the watchtower had evolved again. It now included a section called the Echo, a digital screen that quietly displayed words from watchtower rooms around the world. Not names, not locations, just voices. "I didn't think anyone at work would care. I was grieving. Thank you for making it okay to be quiet. I still don't talk, but I sit here, and that's enough for now." Camilla had designed the interface herself, each message appearing slowly, fading gently, then being replaced. The room no longer needed music. The words were the soundtrack. One afternoon, Elon stopped by with a small team of new hires from the Austin facility. They were touring programs that had shifted Tesla's culture. He let Matteo and Camilla guide them through the watchtower. As they passed the echo wall, one of the new hires asked, "What happens to all the things that don't get said?" Camilla didn't miss a beat. They wait. And when we're ready, they become the next thing that saves someone else. Later, when the room was empty again, Matteo sat at the table, looking at the screen. There were no alerts, no pending tasks, just the quiet hum of presence. He pulled out his notebook, the same one he'd started the day after his first conversation with Elon, and flipped to a blank page. At the top, he wrote, "Things that help." And underneath, listening without needing to fix, saying, "I see you," instead of "cheer up," letting silence speak first, making space before making decisions, showing up, even when you don't know what to say. He closed the notebook and exhaled. Across the room, Camila was organizing letters, some sealed, some open, all handled with care. "You think we're making a difference?" she asked softly. Matteo looked around, at the walls, at the light, at the way the space felt less like an initiative and more like a living thing. "I don't think we are," he said. "I know we are." The momentum had become self-sustaining. What started as an unlikely ripple born from exhaustion and a quiet moment on a factory bench had turned into something much larger than Matteo, Camila, or even Elon could have predicted. Tesla wasn't just building cars, batteries, or solar panels anymore. It was building a new kind of internal architecture. One that didn't rely on command and control, but on connection and care. The watchtower rooms across global locations had begun organically adopting each other's ideas. Shanghai introduced pause pebbles, small glass stones that employees could carry and leave at designated pause points throughout the factory to signify gratitude, grief, or unspoken support. Austin implemented silent syncs, where teams sat together for 10 minutes before every major shift change. No talking, no meetings, just shared presence. In Fremont, Camila walked into the watchtower one morning to find a folded cloth bag left on the central table. Inside were 6 pause pebbles from Shanghai, each etched with a simple word: hold, heal, breathe, continue, begin, enough. She held one up to the light and smiled. It was working. But Matteo knew this was also the part of any movement when fragility returned. He could feel it in the quiet resistance resurfacing in the most subtle ways. Meeting rooms began tightening their schedules again. HR leaders pushed for more measurable outcomes. Even legal issued a soft nudge questioning whether anonymous letters in the mirror might someday be used as evidence in a grievance claim. The world, after all, always tries to pull things back to what it understands. That's why when Elon invited Matteo to a global executive offsite, normally reserved for VPs and regional directors, he said yes without hesitation. "You sure about this?" Camila asked the night before. They were cleaning up the Fremont watchtower, tucking away letters and tidying the low shelves. "No," Matteo said, "but I think it matters that I go." The off-site was held in a quiet retreat center in Northern California. Redwoods towered outside the windows, and the air smelled of pine and distance. No screens, no projectors, just notebooks, people, and space. Elon opened the gathering with a simple statement: "We're here to ask a question we usually avoid. What does it cost us to pretend everything is fine?" For the next 3 days, high-ranking leaders from across the company sat in a series of facilitated sessions. No performance reviews, no roadmaps, just storytelling, silence, and something very close to truth. On the second day, it was Matteo's turn to speak. He stood at the front of the circle, not with a presentation, but with a single sheet of paper. On it were 3 lines, handwritten. "I thought I was weak because I needed rest. But I was actually strong because I asked for it. And now others feel brave enough to ask too." He didn't read anything else. He didn't need to. When he sat back down, someone across the circle, the VP of manufacturing in Texas, whispered, "That's the most honest thing I've heard in 20 years. That night, by the fire pit, Elon sat next to Matteo, sharing a thermos of tea. "You know," Elon said, staring into the flames, "when we started Tesla, we thought the problem was speed. Speed of delivery, speed of innovation, speed of disruption. But now I think maybe the real problem is forgetting. We forget people. We forget ourselves. We forget why we started." Matteo didn't say anything. He just passed him the thermos again. After the retreat, things began shifting in deeper ways. A new internal document was published titled "The Emotional Architecture of Tesla." It wasn't policy. It wasn't HR. It was narrative. A living document outlining not just what the company was building, but how it would care for the people who built it. Camila co-authored it with a quiet pride. Sections included listening as engineering, burnout as data, resilience as ritual, stillness as signal. Each watchtower site received a printed copy, hand-bound with the Tesla logo embossed in silver on the cover. In the Fremont room, it sat on a pedestal beneath the Echo. But perhaps the most unexpected transformation happened during a systems outage. One Friday, a factory-wide network hiccup paused production for nearly 40 minutes. No one could log tasks. No dashboards functioned. There was nothing to do. So, people simply sat together. They gathered in twos and threes near benches on pallets around coffee machines. No one panicked. No one demanded updates. In one corner, a team of mechanics began sharing stories about the worst first days they'd had. Laughter echoed down the hall. When the systems came back online, not a single supervisor yelled. And that Matteo thought was the real milestone. He wrote about it in his notebook that night. The system stopped. And we didn't. We connected. We remembered. We didn't vanish. Maybe that's the point. At the end of that month, a letter arrived from a technician named May in Shanghai. It was translated, neatly typed, and delivered by internal courier. It read, "I don't know your name personally, but I think you were the one who helped start this. I wanted to say thank you. I come to the watchtower during my lunch break, and I sit for 10 minutes. Sometimes I leave a word. Sometimes I just breathe. I don't always believe in corporate change, but I believe in this. Because now, when I walk the floor, I see people carrying pebbles. And when I feel small, I remember I'm not alone." Matteo pinned the letter near the Fremont Echo wall, beside a new card Camila had just added. It had no name, just a quote. "If you make space for humanity, humanity shows up." And as they stood there, side by side, Matteo glanced at her. "We're almost there." Camila looked up from the wall. "Where's there?" He thought for a long moment, then smiled. "Wherever people don't have to hide their truth to keep their job." The first thing Matteo noticed that morning wasn't the hum of the machines or the rhythm of workers clocking in. It was the quiet. A deeper kind of quiet. Not silence, but space. The kind of space people create when they no longer fear being watched, and instead, feel free to be seen. The Fremont Watchtower had opened early, as it always did. But something was different today. A line had formed, not long, but meaningful. Employees weren't waiting for help. They were waiting for something else entirely, reflection. Inside, Camila was already there, setting out fresh tea and clearing off the long table. She had placed a new centerpiece, a simple bowl filled with small, folded cards. A sign beside it read, "A moment for you." Each card contained a question. Just one. What do you need today that you didn't need yesterday? What have you forgiven yourself for? Who saw you when you felt invisible? No names, no obligations, just questions that made people pause. Matteo stepped inside and felt it instantly, that rare sensation when a workplace becomes a sanctuary. Not because of silence, but because of sincerity. By 10 a.m., 5 watchtower rooms around the world were running their own versions of the Moment Bowl. Employees shared stories from Shanghai, where the questions had sparked spontaneous poetry. In Austin, where an intern created a mural of their favorite responses. And in Berlin, where someone simply wrote on a card, "This question gave me my first breath in weeks." Camila walked over and handed Matteo a card from a bowl. He unfolded it slowly. "What part of you did you once hide that now feels safe to show?" He didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. That same morning, a security guard named Russell, usually stoic, always polite, entered the room holding something strange. A box. Inside it were crumpled papers, post-its, old receipts, even a few napkins. All had something scribbled on them. "I've been collecting these," Russell said softly. "They're from trash bins around the floor. People write things down they don't want to say aloud. I didn't throw them out. I didn't read most. But I thought maybe this room would know what to do with them." Matteo looked at the box, heart pounding gently, then looked at Camila. She nodded once. They placed the box on the table. Above it, they added a sign, "Unspoken Archive," because even discarded truths deserve a place. Within hours, employees began bringing their own scraps. Some torn, some water-stained, all real. It became a ritual. Meanwhile, Elon was preparing something of his own. At the next all-hands leadership sync, he opened the session not with data, but with a letter. It was one of the anonymous entries from the Mirror, translated into 5 languages. He didn't read it with performance. He just read it. "I was afraid to be human here. I thought it would make me expendable, but then someone saw me and didn't flinch, and now I can breathe. Maybe that's all it takes." When he finished, he said nothing for 10 full seconds. Then, simply, "That's what we're scaling." For the first time, no one questioned the ROI. Later that week, something extraordinary happened. A production error occurred, a mistake in assembly that delayed an entire batch. In the past, this kind of delay would trigger cascading meetings, disciplinary reviews, and whispered blame. But this time it didn't. The technician who had triggered the error stepped into the watchtower and wrote one sentence on a card. "It was me. I was distracted. My mother called from the hospital, and I didn't tell anyone. I'm sorry." No one reprimanded him. Instead, his manager walked into the room, found the card, and added one of his own. "Thank you for saying something. Let's fix it together." That was all, and the floor kept moving. One night, as Camila and Matteo prepared to close up, she paused near the echo wall. "You ever wonder what would have happened if no one believed you?" Matteo looked up. "All the time. And I don't think I would have stopped," he said, "but it would have taken longer. And I might have believed deep down that it wasn't worth it." Camila turned to him. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I know it always was." Before they left, they opened one last letter from the Mirror. It read, "I don't know what this place is anymore. It used to be just a job. Now it feels like part of my life. Not because everything's perfect, but because I'm not pretending anymore." Camila folded it carefully and placed it into a new section they'd added, "Letters we needed." Matteo lingered a moment longer before turning off the lights, because some rooms don't need to be loud to be alive. They just need to be honest. If there was a word to describe what Tesla had become by then, Matteo wouldn't have chosen company. Not because it wasn't one, it was, and a formidable one at that. But what had taken root in the quiet rooms, the scribbled notes, the pauses before meetings, and the glance exchanged between exhausted co-workers, it wasn't just process. It was culture, lived, breathed, and chosen. The Fremont Watchtower was now the prototype for a new internal standard, not in machinery, but in humanity. One early morning, before most workers had arrived, Matteo stood alone in the space. The walls were fuller than ever. The corkboards no longer had room. The ceiling had quotes pinned to the exposed rafters. There were soft mats in the corner now, for those who came not to talk, but just to be still. The unspoken archive had overflowed. Camila had gently packed its contents into a long, fabric-bound folio. She called it the Quiet Testament. It was still dark outside when he sat at the table and opened his notebook. This time, he didn't write anything. He just listened, because silence, he'd learned, often spoke the loudest. By the time the first shift clocked in, Camila had arrived, carrying 2 cups of tea and a small wooden box. She smiled. "For you." He opened it. Inside was a hand-carved piece of wood, polished smooth, with a single word etched into it. "Anchor." "Because that's what you've been," she said. Matteo blinked quickly. "I thought you didn't do big gestures." "I don't," she said, "but I make exceptions for anchors." They both laughed quietly. By mid-morning, they received a message from Austin. A group of technicians had created a mobile watchtower, a small, wheeled cart with a mirror, cards, tea, and a tiny shelf for the paused pebbles. They pushed it through the facility during long shifts, offering a moment of breath to anyone who needed it. No judgment, no agenda. A photo of the cart arrived alongside the message. Camila printed it and pinned it to the wall with a single note underneath. "We're still building." Later that day, a team lead from the powertrain division entered the watchtower holding a tablet and a worried expression. "There's an issue," she said. "Technical." Matteo asked, She shook her head. No, it's emotional. He and Camila looked at each other. Tell us. There's a guy on my team, David. Solid worker, never late, always focused, but something's off. He's not here. Not like he used to be, but he won't talk, won't pause. Says he doesn't want attention. Camila nodded slowly. Sometimes people need a different door. That's when she introduced the parallel letters idea. It had been floating around for weeks, but they hadn't implemented it yet. The concept was simple. For people who weren't ready to speak, others could write to them, not knowing their name, just writing as if, with empathy, kindness, and truth. Each letter would begin, "To whoever needs this." They launched the board that afternoon. By evening, it had 12 letters. By the end of the week, it had 73. Some were long, some were just a sentence. You don't have to be okay to keep showing up, but I hope you rest anyway. I was where you are. Maybe not exactly, but close enough to say, please don't give up. You matter even when it feels like you don't. The board was placed in a corner alcove. No fanfare, no announcement, just presence. 2 days later, David stopped by the watchtower. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't even take a seat. He just stood there for 20 minutes, reading the letters. Then he left. But the next morning, a new card appeared in the mirror. It read, "I didn't know how much I needed to hear someone else say it first. Thank you." Mateo found Camila and showed her the card. She didn't say anything. She just rested her head briefly against his shoulder, because some victories don't call for words. Around the same time, Elon invited Mateo to co-host a fireside live stream for Tesla employees worldwide. It wasn't about product updates or financials. It was about presence. The event was informal. No scripts, no set topics. Just two people talking about what it meant to be human inside a system built for speed. Elon opened with a thought. The greatest innovation we've ever made wasn't a car or a rocket. It was admitting we needed a place to pause. Mateo followed. And the greatest thing we ever scaled was empathy. Not as performance, but as practice. Thousands watched. Some from break rooms, some from home, some while walking between stations. And in the hours that followed, watchtower rooms everywhere overflowed. Not with problems, but with presence. Letters, pauses, conversations, tears, laughter. One employee from the Nevada site posted a short message afterward that echoed across internal channels. "I used to clock out. Now I check in with myself. That's new. That's Lighthouse." As the day came to a close, Mateo returned to the Fremont Watchtower and added one more entry to his notebook. "We created a place for emotion. Then we discovered it was a blueprint. Not for feelings alone, for trust, for choice, for showing up anyway, and maybe for building something we don't have to recover from later." Camila found him there, watching the sun set through the tall windows. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just placed a fresh pause pebble beside him and sat. And together, without rushing, without fixing, without needing anything from each other, they rested. Not because they were done, but because they knew how far they'd come. On the final Friday of the quarter, something rare happened at Tesla. It wasn't a product reveal or a breakthrough in energy storage or a new announcement that would ripple through tech media in bold headlines. It was quieter than that, but no less revolutionary. Across Tesla's global network, from Fremont to Shanghai, Berlin to Buffalo, each watchtower space opened early and stayed open late. There were no speeches, no agendas. Instead, a simple message had been sent out to every employee 2 days prior. "Come as you are. No words required. The rooms will be ready." Mateo Reyes arrived before sunrise. The sky was still lavender, the building mostly silent. Inside the Fremont Watchtower, candles flickered from a new stillness shelf, an alcove designed by a group of junior engineers who wanted to honor silence as function, not just absence. Camila was already there, of course, placing 3 folded cloths on a bench by the window. One was for sitting, one for weeping, and one, perhaps the most sacred, for remembering. She looked over her shoulder at Mateo and gave a small nod. It feels like we're preparing for something holy." He nodded back. "Maybe we are." By mid-morning, the watchtower was filled not with noise, but with presence. A technician who rarely left the robotics wing brought a poem she had written after her mother's death. She pinned it next to the "letters we needed" wall and walked away without saying a word. A cafeteria worker came during his break and left behind a single sticky note. "I stayed because of this room." One of the shift leads from shipping brought his teenage daughter. She didn't speak, but stood in front of the Echo for 10 full minutes, eyes moving across the flowing messages like they were constellations. In Austin, the mobile watchtower made its way through the main battery floor, staffed by a team wearing shirts that simply said, "Pause is power." In Berlin, Emil organized a communal letter-writing session. Dozens participated, not writing complaints but affirmations, some in German, others in Turkish, Polish, and English. The translated letters were printed and hung around their facility like banners. And in Shanghai, employees lined the walls with hand-drawn portraits of the people who had changed their day, their month, their year, with one label beneath each sketch. "You saw me." Back in Fremont, as the sun reached its peak, Elon walked into the watchtower quietly. He didn't say anything at first, just stood near the entrance, observing. Matteo approached him after a few minutes. "Thought you might come." Elon glanced around the room, then back at Matteo. "I wouldn't be anywhere else today." They sat near the stillness shelf, no cameras, no fanfare. Eventually, Elon spoke. "I used to think scale was everything. The more we built, the more we mattered. But this..." He gestured toward the overflowing mirror, the seated employees, the unguarded emotion in the air. "This is the only thing I've ever seen scale inward." Matteo nodded. "Turns out, some things don't need code. Just courage." Camila joined them a moment later, offering them both small clay cups of herbal tea, another new tradition started by a janitorial team member named Reiko, who called it warm permission. They drank in silence. And for the first time since the entire journey began, Elon reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a note of his own. It was wrinkled, handwritten, and short. "For years I outran myself. This space let me stop without collapsing. That's all I needed. Thank you." He didn't say who wrote it. He didn't have to. Later, as the watchtower gently emptied, Camila brought out one final letter, this one wrapped in deep green fabric. Matteo raised an eyebrow. "I wrote this a while ago," she said, "but I was waiting for the right moment." She unwrapped it, read it softly aloud. "To the version of me who thought she had to be silent to survive. You were strong. You were resourceful. But now you can rest. Now you can speak. And the room will not fall apart." Matteo blinked quickly, overcome. Camila folded the letter and placed it in the archive box. "I think we're ready," she said. "For what?" he asked. She smiled gently. "To stop needing proof." That evening, as the last employees filtered out, the watchtower lights dimmed to soft amber. Matteo and Camila remained, walking the room slowly, pausing at each wall, each corner, each note. At one point, Matteo stopped at the quote he'd written months earlier, back when the whole thing had felt like a fragile experiment. "What we can't measure, we must protect." He traced the words with his finger. Then, beneath it, he wrote a new line. "What we protect begins to measure us." The final image of the day was simple. Matteo and Camila, seated side by side on the floor beneath the Echo, warm light on their faces, surrounded by the quiet thrum of voices left behind, not as echoes of pain, but of resilience, presence, and belief. Not in systems, not in brands, but in each other. And if any part of this story made you pause, just for a moment, maybe you're part of this movement too. We'd love to know where this found you. Drop the name of your city in the comments, or tell us where your watchtower would belong. Not out of habit, but because presence, even online, still matters. We're listening. Always.